What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Scott Mordell, Young Professional Organization's longest-serving chief executive. YPO has 29,000 members in 142 countries, committed to becoming better leaders and better people together. Scott grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and played hockey, basketball, baseball, and football. He was an offensive lineman at Albion College before continuing his education at Michigan State and earning a master's from Northwestern.
I strongly and firmly believe the status quo is never successful. For everybody who wants to grow their organization, everybody who wants to grow their career, everybody who wants to grow themselves has to be an agent of change. Therefore, the status quo is never acceptable. How does one learn what the change needs to look like? That's a key premise. The other key premise is there's always something going on. You and I could be sitting on a beach having a Mai Tai together, but the world's got a lot going on. So sitting on the beach having a good experience isn't teaching me about what's going on. So there's just a humility that I'm never going to know it all, but definitely need to know more.
Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, Don.
Digging into and learning a little bit about both your athletic and professional history, I saw where as a young person there wasn't a sport you didn't play, it seemed, right? Baseball, basketball, football, hockey, pictures of you everywhere in all of those different uniforms. Do you remember the first time you were connected to sports in some way, you picked up a ball?
I remember very much that the first ball was always a baseball. Where we grew up, and I had 4 other brothers, we were always very active throwing things around. In our house, the baseball was the smallest ball we could hurl, and that's exactly what we did.
It could do the most damage, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cubs or White Sox?
Cubs.
Good deal. I wrote a book with David Ross
out
of the 2016 World Series, and we did a session with him that ran just a few episodes ago. Pretty fun.
Yeah.
Growing up in Detroit, you attended De La Salle, right? Mm-hmm. And you ended up playing football. Now, what made you pick football? You had all these other sports that you enjoyed, but football became your sport of choice. Why?
Well, football was just all camaraderie in a very intense way. But really, I enjoyed hockey the most. I was a goalie in hockey and thoroughly loved playing goalie. The great thing about being goalie is you never come off the ice. You're always in the game, and therefore you always matter to the game. And I love that. But the challenge with where I went to high school was we didn't have a hockey team. And so for me to play club hockey meant that I wouldn't be around very much with any of my friends, and it just didn't seem right. So actually I chose football really just to be with my friends and do the camaraderie. And so it was a choice for the competition and the team more than for my personal effects.
Well, that's awesome. But that's a great point in hockey. That as a goalie, you have that opportunity. You're constantly involved in the outcome. There's no shifts, no concern of how much playing time you're going to get. You got to be good. You got to be willing to take a shot or two to the body, but pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I loved being there where if I did something well, I knew it immediately. And if I did something poorly, I knew that immediately too. To talk about an immediate feedback role, right? So it was great.
Yeah, some great business lessons in that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At De La Salle, your coach there, John Morano, was so well known for turning that team into a powerhouse. Tell me about Coach Morano. What did you learn from him, and what kind of style of leadership did he bring?
He was quite amazing to me because he was the first coach I ever had who was so organized and disciplined. He would post practice schedules, which isn't too revolutionary now, Don, but at the time it was just a total brain bender. He would post a practice schedule that would say from 8:03 to 8:07, we're going to do this. And from 8:08, we're going to do that. And he was just so disciplined and he stayed to it. He never ran drills off of the times. We never ran long in practice. He stayed to it. And even our football games were scheduled for 8:01 p.m. on Friday nights. The reason being, always wanted to stand out, always wanted that particularness. It was a great lesson of the importance of organization and discipline just in how I go about my work. And the other great lesson from him is our high school had the mantra, it's an all-boys high school, but it was builders of boys, makers of men. And he was very much about the people. If one of us was struggling in class or one of us was having any kind of those socialization issues that high schoolers tend to have, he would make no question about sticking his nose into that and really kind of helping us along. So I just remember the totality of him being not quite a parent, but certainly somebody who's got an outlook for everybody on the team. And I appreciated that.
And, when you think of that from a leadership perspective, how powerful is that as a lesson? You will lead people who know that you care about them. He showed you that through ways that had nothing to do with X's and O's in drawing up plays to win games.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an accountability in all of that too, because once he creates the expectation and he's coached you one way, pretty much has a reason to expect you to do that. Force some real discipline and repetition, which is so important in sports success.
Was there ever an opportunity for you to end up on the downside of that accountability?
Now, Don, of course. There's no learning without mistakes. There's no learning without being on both sides. Doing things right is not really a path to learning. So yeah, I found myself on the old offensive line lookout block, which created some real accountability there.
Senior year at De La Salle, your team finished 8-1. At the time, it was the best record ever by that team. Do you have a favorite memory from that season?
Oh, I do. And this was after a couple of years of our team and our senior class coming together, really through a lot of losses. And we were a young high school team in our sophomore and junior years. And in that senior year, we were in a new division. This created the opportunity for us to hopefully crystallize. So we won the first couple games, but we played the last year's division winner in our third game. And we won. We won very handily. And I'll never forget that moment of wow, we might really be good. That sense of realization that all of this effort and all of this practice might actually yield to something, and it's not just a pipe dream. So that 3-0 time during that season was really a special time for us of realization and validation for the work we had been doing.
Isn't it interesting that sometimes that crystallization can come together early in a season, sometimes late, but whatever it is, when it does, you can point to it. It's as real as anything else that happens, in society. You can point to the moment when it just felt like it gelled.
Absolutely, Don. And even more than that, not just gelling as a team, it's gelling as people. Mm-hmm. A lot of people go through college and other experiences and they say, boy, my college friends are my best friends. But my high school friends, the people that I was on that team with, they're lifelong. We have a shared experience and a shared bond. Whenever we connect as if we've never been apart. It's really quite impressive. And it is that congealing kind of spirit that you just outlined.
When we get a chance, and obviously you have too, you get a chance to speak to a lot of business leaders. It's amazing that having had that experience in sports, that when those business opportunities exist where the team comes together and where something extraordinary happens, and those are unforgettable moments in business, just as in sports.
Oh, that's so true. In fact, I tell everybody I'm a frustrated high school football coach. I didn't have the guts to be a high school football coach, so I went into business. But I view it very much the same way. Everybody's here as a team, and that whole spirit of roles and everything else become pretty paramount relative to how I like to lead and how I like to, quite frankly, be led by people who are leading their roles.
Yeah. After De La Salle, you went on and you took your football talents to Albion. It's not quite South Beach. And there you were coached by Frank Duranko. I had a chance to read a little about him. And as an offensive lineman, one of the things that stood out, and I'm looking at you now, you were the smallest player at your position group. You weighed 230 pounds playing offensive line in college. I can't even imagine at any level how great that was. But what did you learn being the smallest player in a position group where other people might have outweighed you by 60 or 70 pounds?
Well, first of all, nobody really cared how big or small I was. They talk about the accountability of the role and having to perform. I was expected to perform. If I'm going heads up on somebody who's 280 pounds or whatever that was, Nobody really cared if he was bigger or smaller. I had to perform. So the idea that the commitment to the cause, the commitment to what accountability and what I need to do in order to remain in the lineup was unchanged because of that. I got knocked around a little bit more, quite likely, but at the same time, that's really all I knew, and that was the approach. Going back to the discipline and the orientation that we just talked about from high school, and offensive line in football is all about staying underneath the incoming defensive person and keeping your weight underneath you and a little bit forward, and always having to be in that position if you're not surprising somebody with your hip. So I spent a lot of time squatting and staying low and sometimes diving, whatever it took.
So tell me a little bit about Coach. Coach Duranko was, he didn't just coach football. He also was a baseball coach. In fact, I think the baseball field at Albion is still named after him. Tell me about a leader like him and what you might have learned or seen as you were developing the leader within you.
He was an amazing guy. First of all, as an athlete at Albion, he was a 3-sport letterman. So he played in 3 different sports, lettered across all of them, was inducted in the Hall of Fame as an athlete. And then in time, he ended up getting inducted back into the Albion Hall of Fame as a coach and administrator as well.
Wow.
The great thing about him is he loved to compete, and he really appreciated the team environment. Unlike Coach Moranto, where in high school there's this idea of, the coach is kind of paramount and we all love to hate our coach while they're the coach, right? Coach Duranko was looking around at all kinds of us in the locker room and really treated us all as men and all as equals. And he just happened to be the coach. And it was such a pivot because Division III football isn't necessarily the less talented people. They might be a little bit slower. They might be not as big and whatever else, but they're very committed to the competition. And he treated us all as people. And he was really special that way. And so when I was being held accountable in whichever way, shape, or form, it was just very much as not even as a mentor. It's like, hey, if you want to keep playing on this team, this is exactly what you're going to need to do. You're going to have to put your nose down to this. And it was just a different way of engaging. And it really struck with me. And I've continued to hopefully model that in everything I've done since.
How do you do some version of that with those that you lead today?
First of all, it's people. We're just people doing different things. And I truly believe that it's all about the people and how we engage with each other. So this idea that I'm CEO and I'm paramount on something and going to tell somebody exactly how to do it and their humanity is exactly the way to demotivate somebody or not to coach and teach somebody. So I treat everybody as equal. It doesn't matter if it's a 12-year-old kid on the baseball field or if it's an executive right now. It's like, first and foremost, hey, what's going on with you? How you doing? Where are you at with your life, with what you're doing? Seems you're a little distracted at work. What's really happening for you? And just approaching that with that kind of equality, I've found to be very validating for me as a human being in the way that I get to interact with people, but also very validating for them because it's a slightly different twist than maybe they may hold somebody in that position of authority. And yet they always respond to it. I've never had it work against me because people say, well, I'm a person first. Well, that's good. Let's talk about that.
And the idea that you're intentionally asking questions and then listening. Those are skill sets all their own, asking the right questions and then listening.
Absolutely. We're all processing information all the time. Change is the constant. The feedback loops are the constant. And the death of a career, the death of success is when you stop processing information. So I'm always seeking it. Sometimes the biggest challenge is getting people to truly share it because sometimes people are intimidated by the roles. But when that information flow truly is equal, it's liberating for both me as CEO and also the person as I'm working.
The death of success is when you stop processing information. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm making notes. I'm already on page 2. This is good. So after 2 years at Albion, you chose to transfer to Michigan State and to focus on academics and not chase athletic glory or enjoyment anymore. What led you to that decision? I'm always fascinated about, many of us who've been there understand what it's like to realize when you realize it's over.
Oh, Don, I was so conflicted. First of all, going to Michigan State was important for my career path. I wanted to be an accountant, and they have a great accounting program. And Albion, the city of Albion, was just a little small, and it was getting a little repetitive for me. But Michigan State football, George Perlis had just taken over for Muddy Waters.
Oh, yeah.
Nick Saban, nobody knew how great he was then, but he was the defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
All right. And I was like, well, I could play. I was in good enough shape and all the rest. It's like, I just want to get on the special teams. I want to hear my name on the PA. How great would it be to put on the equipment and just get called for a tackle on the punt? I think that'd be fantastic. And then once I started really understanding what it would be to be a walk-on there and realizing I was not just the smallest person in Division III program, but I'd be tiny, by Big Ten football standards. The amount of pain I'm going to have to take being on the scout team, even if I can get to it, in order for that one Saturday is just going to be too much. So I sat in the stands. We cheered on George Perlis, and things were beginning to change that year, even though the record wasn't that great. And I had a lot of friends that were on the team. But at the same time, it's just that weaning myself off of the organized athletic competition and the camaraderie.
In the most recent portion of your professional career, you're now wrapping up 9 years as the CEO of YPO Global, a leadership community of extraordinary chief executives, all of whom are under 45. The premise of this podcast is, as you and I were discussing earlier, that a disproportionate number of Fortune 500 executives were actively engaged in sports at the high school or collegiate levels, and that the experience they had there helped shape the way they lead today. And as a leader of leaders, do you agree with that general premise?
I have found the overlaps to be extraordinary, actually. And you have to step back and say, what is an organization? Really, just what's an organization? Doesn't matter if it's a business or the PTA or school or whatever else. An organization really only has 4 parts, Don. There's a common purpose. People come together. There has to be some kind of process and organization to how those people work together, because the idea of an organization is that we can do more together than we can individually. And then there needs to be some resources. Resources are capital that make it all happen. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot to me like a sports team. You come together in common purpose, a bunch of people. You have to organize and create processes for the participation of those people. And you have to resource the team, whether that be through equipment or whether that be by time and attention and space in order to which to practice. They're exactly the same. So how do people come together? How do you create common cause? And how do you help the people find their best roles so that all of them together can do more than any of them can do alone? So I've taken that approach very much into my leadership, recognizing that we're all here. And if I change out one person on my senior team, my team's different, right? Because the next person I'm going to put in doesn't have the same sets of skills necessarily that the person that left. So now we have to readapt as a team relative to where our skills are and where they're not. It's the same thing the offensive line had to do when I may have gotten hurt or I got pulled out of the game and somebody else comes in to fill the right guard role at Albion College. That person's got different skills. Maybe he's a better pass blocker than me, and therefore we want to be very careful. Or how does he match up relative to what's out there? You adapt. That's what the good leaders do relative to the people that they have. And so I think they're exactly the same. And that's where in my hiring, I'm always looking for people who have athletic backgrounds. Not that it's exclusive, but people know how to be on a team and know how to adapt to others, typically have done it over and over and over again. And that's really the sports analogy.
And as you pointed out, it's that willingness to adapt. We all have a game plan. Everybody, believes that there's something there for your organization and here's where we're going to go. But then a pandemic hits or travel bans are established or whatever it might be that suddenly changes the direction that you're destined to go. So I think that you've hit it. When you're looking to add to your organization, are they people that can make those pivots with you? And often athletics is a place where they've had to do it.
Absolutely. And we all know talent alone doesn't win anything. It's a talent deployed and also reactive to the environment where it's deployed. So it's all codependent.
You were coached, we've named a couple of them already, of some great leaders in your sports career. Is there a story where something you learned from one of those leaders actually has impacted a decision or a way that you have chosen to lead at YPO Global?
Yeah. First of all, the approach that it's all about the people has carried on with me really through Coach Moranto, Coach Duranko, and everything else that I'm carrying along. That's my core premise, really about where I go first, about how we organize our folks in our group. My more analogous story really comes down from one of my great leader mentors and also a YPO member, as it turns out, a gentleman named Dick Duchessois. And he promoted me to be CEO the very first time. So I was a young CEO and he's just an incredible success. We had to close an 87-year-old institution because it was the least bad choice of relative to what it was going to be going forth. In the way he took heat for the choice and the way that we really fought through crisis in that bad choice has really just taught me that it's not always about making the best decision. It's the best choice. Sometimes you're just choosing the least bad option. And you have to have the fortitude to just frame it as it's the least bad thing. And my very first day of YPO, we were hosting a big conference, one of the biggest conferences of CEOs annually every year, several thousand CEOs. And we had to make a bad choice between Julian Assange on our agenda and former President George Bush. And it was very difficult to have both of them on the agenda. And so we had to choose, and we chose our principles, which is to say, we're about open idea and expression. We're here to learn. We're not here to advocate any political point of view and the rest. And we went with Julian Assange on that agenda, and we took a lot of criticism for it. But you have to make the least bad choice. And we've made amends with former President Bush. He's been a YPO speaker and just a real teacher of us in many different ways. But sometimes you just need to make a bad choice and go with that.
What a powerful lesson, though, right? It's not about making the best decisions. It's making the best choice. It's a really strong lesson. And the ability to kind of know that that's what you're making, not try to sugarcoat it, just say, look, this is what we're faced with, and this is how we're going to make the best decision. That's pretty powerful.
And there's always a higher principle in what you have to choose. You can choose profit over safety, or you can choose safety over profit. You have to have that higher principle. And this is where principled leadership and value-based leadership, I do believe, comes very much out of people with cumulative experience in sports is very helpful, because you begin to understand a lot of values relative to what matters to you and what matters to the organization of which you're serving. So if there's alignment between you and the organization's values, that's critical to truly be an effective leader. And when you have that alignment, you have to make decisions based on those values first and foremost. So that's what we were doing. We did it intentionally, and it was painful and still hurts relative to, you just want to make everybody happy and just really create as much things to go, but have to have the fortitude not to do that.
Right. I love it. One of the key tenets of YPO, I have had the opportunity to work with a number of chapters over time, is the participation in small groupings called forums. Mm-hmm. Why are those kinds of small groupings so important?
Well, thank you. First of all, it is about people, right? The challenge of being a leader is many people look at you as being all alone. Mm-hmm. They look at you on the top of the organization, or they look at you as the decider. And yet every leader shouldn't be walking alone through their lives and what it is that they're doing. We don't walk alone. None of us do. But where can we walk with people whose primary interest is goodwill toward you? Not doing business with you, not being your son or daughter, not being a good friend, but really the goodwill for your good. So the forums come together really with I call it 3 principles. We structure it differently, and our protocols really work well. But first of all, everybody comes. You have to be totally honest with whatever you're experiencing. Second is you need to truly accept the other people for what they're sharing and whatever's going on. You just accept it.
Not judgmental.
You got to be open to sharing your experience. And third is everything's confidential. That has to be a safe spot to where somebody can be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm about to go bankrupt. Here's what's in my head. What do you think? When you can have those kinds of conversations, it's incredibly bonding. And it's not just business, it's personal, it's family. These 6 to 12 people come together every single month, and they have an open, confidential discussion in a forum to deal with life's issues. And so our CEOs, they don't walk alone. They've got this entire community, and we have access to the community. They've got people who care first and foremost to goodwill for them and their growth more than any other agenda. And that's really hard for a CEO leader to find in life outside of these forums, because everybody sees you as a business person first. We put all that outside the door and we leave it there.
And listening and reading some about you, I know that you've actually shared that your experience in forum has helped shape your life, not just your business career. Would you mind sharing a little of that?
It's truly been transformative for me. And the idea that I became CEO of the organization at a fairly young age, and we all live and learn from the demonstrations and examples that we have in our lives. So is success really about the big score? Is success about how people kowtow to you? Is success about driving a really fancy car? I mean, what is success, and what is life, and what is happiness? To be able to sit with others on what we've talked about, I've learned, when you strip away all of the things that we see and read about or perceive, when we meet people, we're all very similar. We have concerns about our kids. We have concerns about whether or not we fit. We have concerns about whether we're validated. We all have that same stuff. And when you can see that, it gave me a lot of comfort as a middle-class kid, kind of growing up with a lot of different exposure to things that totally outside my background, to realize that everybody in that room has insecurities and has ambitions and has just questions and has struggles. So to truly create the acceptance is to experience it. And through the forums, I was able to experience it. So I say it very freely and truly, I'm certainly a better CEO. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better human being. And I know that I'm a lot happier as a human being because I understand the journey in a different way than I would have without forum.
You know, when I read and listened to some about you, one word that came up that really stood out to me was around some decisions you made a little more than a decade ago when you chose to recalibrate life. I love the way you said that. You recalibrated your life. We all imagine a trajectory, and sometimes we actually need to stop, as you did. Can you share a little there with us as well?
Thank you. It was truly really a life-shaping kind of experience for me. It's easy as we live day to day in our lives to keep making incremental decisions that take us down the best path that we can see then. But until you can step back and look at those decisions and understand what you're processing, it's very difficult to really see a bigger picture. And so those that meditate and do other things, that's a really good daily recalibration. But for me, I was working too much. I was disconnected with my family, wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just wanted to truly settle in with my family because I always said that was important, but I was working in a way that it proved that it wasn't as important day to day as it should have been. So to step out and really kind of recalibrate to that reminded me it's all about the people, and none of us really matter that much except for the people of whom we love and care about and who care about us. In that sense, how do I stay on a journey that's about my personal growth, keeps me connected with the people that I love, and I can meet new people that I can begin to love, and at the same time really enjoy that journey, because in the journey is the success. Same as in sports, you may win the game, but you won that game most likely because of all of the practice and all of the preparation and all of the things you've done to train and be ready. And to me, I don't know if it's an analogy or a metaphor actually, Don, but it's really kind of the same cycle kind of playing its way out.
What did you do during that time off? I mean, what did recalibration look like for you?
At first, all I did is I got up every morning and I did exactly what I wanted to do. Then I started to think about what actions am I taking that are proving what really matters to me. So yeah, for the first 3 days, you eat a lot of cookies and you sit on your couch. And then after that, you just realize, well, that's not enough. I've got to do more. I've got to stimulate myself. I found the process of meeting people to be incredibly energizing. If I can just meet people for the sake of connecting with them, learning what their interests are, talking about what's going on, that is very, very invigorating. I became more and more extroverted in the way that I lived my life, not because of the work I had to do in my job, but because I knew that's what I had to be as a person. So that was a calibration. It's a very human realignment, as it turned out.
Yeah. You know, I love that idea. What actions am I taking that prove what matters to me? And if we can ask ourselves that question every day, we might come up with answers that might not make us happy, right? We have to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, well, deep down, with whatever we consider discretionary time, and even that could be debated, we do what we want to do. We may rationalize it differently, but we do what we want to do. In your actions is your intent. It's pretty telling and sobering, and that's why my forum's been so helpful. I said, Scott, you said you were doing this, but you're over here doing that.
Accountability.
Can you just explain what the difference is? It's like, oh, yeah, hold me accountable to that, aren't you? Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. That's awesome that you were in a place in your life to be able to take that amount of time. And it was 1.5 years that you took off as part of this recalibration. What kind of advice would you give to that person who might not be able to imagine taking that kind of time off to begin a process somewhat similar?
Yeah, first of all, I realized what I did was an incredible blessing, and a blessing that my family's willing to do that with me. But we all have the opportunity to really go inside of ourselves. That's really what I did. I just did it over a period of time. But whether one's on a treadmill or one's going for a run or just sitting for some private time to say, this is my me time, how am I going to use it? I believe very firmly we need to go inside of ourselves. Sometimes it's getting the mind to stop turning, and other times it's really fixating on a particular question and really just playing with it. Just play with it, not to get it done, but play with it and just go with that in time. And I find after I come out of a question to say, am I proving I love the people that I say that I love? You spend a half hour on that on a treadmill and really cycle that around, you come out with a much different view toward yourself than you did when you went in. And if you're willing to challenge yourself and be honest with yourself, that's the best me time we could possibly have. So I think any one of us can truly recalibrate, and we're probably healthier if we do recalibrate more frequently rather than a once in a lifetime sabbatical, to actually stay more calibrated along the way by doing things like that.
Yeah, I love it. One of the quotes I read from you is, how can I make what is important to me more effective in what I do?
Mm.
Again, these are the questions, and I'm sure there were a series of them that you found yourself constantly digesting. Pretty powerful.
Yeah, in my sabbatical time, I also did actually create a set of business principles for myself. It's easy to read any of the 11,000 leadership books that get published every year and all of this other stuff. And some people say it's all about the people. Some people say you need a good strategy. I mean, you hear all this noise and it's easy to want to try to do everything. But at the end of the day, you have to organize yourself around some certain things that are going to be true for you. So I spent an interactive time with my friends in Forum creating my own business principles that have guided me. And it's been phenomenally focused for me.
How many principles did you land?
There's 5.
5.
So first is to organize people around a common cause and purpose that inspires them. Second is whatever you do, do it on purpose. Be very intentional about the things that you do. Third is create an environment where people can do their best work or become their best selves and truly focus on the positive more than the negative. Fourth is relentless focus on service and execution and making sure that we've got that execution, because a good idea not executed doesn't really work well, very much in a sports analogy. And the fifth one, quite clearly, is serve with passion for others to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what servant leadership is anymore, but the idea that I'm here to serve the cause, I'm here to serve the people serving the cause, I'm here to serve our stakeholders. I'm not here to service or aggrandize myself. So I've always put myself in that humility fifth on that list. So in that sense, those are the 5.
Wow, those are awesome. And I scribbled them down here because you're right. I've read many leadership books as well. And I think you've hit it right on the head. It's important that we establish for ourselves what would be the really important lessons that we'd want to define as our leadership mantra, right? Our leadership strategy. I know there's a word that you love and that you used a lot, the word curiosity. I found that to be one of the most significant traits of any great leader that I've studied or had a chance to interview. If you possess it, it signals to others that you don't know all the answers. You have the self-confidence to be willing to go in the search of those answers and the willingness to take whatever comes your way. Tell me about, how do you maintain your willingness to learn and to remain creative, even as you've risen to such significant roles as you have today?
First, I think the most important actions and consistency are really rooted in your belief system. I strongly and firmly believe the status quo is never successful. For everybody who wants to grow their organization, everybody who wants to grow their career, everybody who wants to grow themselves has to be an agent of change. Therefore, the status quo is never acceptable. How does one learn what the change needs to look like? That's a key premise. The other key premise is there's never nothing going on. Okay, there's always something going on. You and I could be sitting on a beach having a Mai Tai together, but the world's got a lot going on. So sitting on the beach having a good experience isn't teaching me about what's going on. So there's just a humility that I'm never going to know it all, but definitely need to know more. Being curious with questions, that's where delight comes from. That's where surprise comes from. That's for, how cool. And that's where innovation comes from. So to be a change agent, we need innovation. We need things to change. And that means that we need to be willing to process information differently and apply information differently. And if you don't have the curiosity and the humility to process what you're hearing, you might be successful for a short time, but you're going to crash because you're missing something big.
Yeah. At YPO, the numbers are incredible. 29,000 global members, 142 countries. And a big piece of the organization is not just the learning, but the networking. One of the things I read about your recalibration period, that sabbatical you took, was you actually said, I learned what networking is and what it is not. You talked earlier about how you made yourself more of an extrovert. Explain that to me. When you say what networking is and what it's not, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Too often, networking is viewed in a way, I need to get a job, I got to start networking. Or, geez, I'm really trying to grow sales, I just got to network my way over into this industry or this business. And such transactional thinking. In many ways, it's very hat in hand thinking. It's a I want and you have kind of attitude. So there's a power structure in the interaction already because I want and you have. And I'm going in seeking, and I'm hoping you have either benevolence or mutual value to give back to me. And that to me is what network shouldn't be. And that is what it is for so many people. What I've found so much more liberating and exciting and easier to do is to say, wait a second, my name's Scott Mordell. I'm going to meet Don Yeager. I've got some things going on in my life. Don's got stuff going on in his life. Why don't we approach this as human beings and be people and see if we can't strike up a relationship, find out what we have in common, find out how I can help him, okay, because that's a big part of the fun, and see if there's a way that he can identify ways where he might, if he likes a relationship, might be willing to help me.
But not an expectation.
No, none.
You're coming into it with a willingness to give, and what you get in return will just be a bonus if it happens.
The world will find itself. And if somebody respects you and they connect with you and you connect with them and you're able to nurture that relationship and you choose that it's important enough to do that, that's great. A lot of people nowadays have, 4,000 connections on LinkedIn and everything else.
And they know no one.
They don't know any of them. And you know what? What's the point?
Right.
And here's a really powerful LinkedIn thing that I've been doing, and this might be of interest to your listeners. I get these requests from people who I don't know, and they may be just hitting connect because I was CEO of YPO or whatever else. I respond back to them and say, look, I don't know you. I only try to connect with people that I do know. If you'd be interested in taking 15 minutes to get acquainted, I'd love to become acquainted with you. 80% of the people never respond because that's way too much human interaction that they were looking for. Okay? But those that do, those are often the people who really do want to connect. So I'll block a couple hours a week for those kinds of calls, and they're fun. They're like a professor's office hours, if you will. You don't know what you're going to get. And so you talk to these folks, and I've found it very exciting, and it keeps me thinking outside of YPO, and yet at the same time keeps me connected to people. And it means my LinkedIn network's a little bit more robust as a result because I know somebody.
They really are part of a network for you.
Exactly.
What's a good question you ask those people when you get them on that 15-minute call?
It's kind of fun. A lot of times I'll just say, hey, I know we don't have a lot of time and all the rest, but what makes you tick? Why'd you reach out to me? And that's not a business question. It's a personal question.
Yeah.
And more often than not, people's like, oh, okay, that's how we're going to play. Here we go. And it's so much fun. It's because it is all about the people.
It is interesting. If you set a standard for people that want into your world, it's amazing how many people never come back, right? I mean, as you're talking about it, you say, here's what you have to, if you really want to be connected, you've got to do this. And it's only 15 minutes and I'm actually giving it to you. I'd love to ask you that question. What makes you tick?
Thank you. It's very simple for me. I need a challenge, a big challenge. And it's got to be a challenge solving a cause that I think matters. So I'm a believer in that Scott's existence on this planet is not foreordained in anything, but I just hope I can make a positive impact on people. So I need a positive impact, a big challenge, and I just want to work alongside people that matter to me that I think are phenomenal and interesting. So those are my three requirements, and it's not industry specific. It's not anything. And I've found that whether I was doing sports or business or even going on vacations with people and trying to decide who I'd want to go with, those three things keep overlapping over and over.
Wow. I know that by the time we're recording this now, and it's going to run here in a couple of weeks, but you're transitioning. You're actually handing the reins of the organization over. So along those lines, with that's what makes you tick, do you have a sense of what's on the horizon?
I don't know exactly right now. And I've decided I'm going to follow the advice I've given a whole number of other CEOs and leaders, which is when you're making a significant life shift, it's important to recalibrate, if you will, and take a little time to do that. And I use this analogy that I think life is very much like a theme park. None of us would go to Six Flags or Disney World and ride the same ride the entire time because life's too short and you've only got one day at the theme park. You're going to want to sample all sorts of different things. Well, my YPO ride is ending, and I'm glad for that, but I don't know where else in the park I want to go. But I do know that if I'm on a roller coaster, I don't know which way the wind is blowing. So the best way to figure out the wind and figure out what matters is just create a little space if we're blessed enough to be able to do that. So I'm going to take a little time, hug my wife a little bit more frequently than we have up to now because of the work, sleep a little better, and then I'm going to start saying, okay, where do I see an impact I can make? Where do I see a challenge where I can support it? And where do I see interesting people that are working on it? And that's where I'll play next. But we'll see in the coming months, I'm sure.
I love it. I can't wait to stay in touch now that we're LinkedIn friends.
Yeah.
And get a chance to make sure that I figure out what ride you're on next. I'm going to make sure I buy a ticket to that ride. One of the things that has always stood out and been intriguing to me, especially in the intersection of sports and business, is how many business people talk about their organizations as teams, right? They use the teams word. But the truth is, we've been on teams. We know what teams look like. And most organizations that we're talking about are really a collection of folks kind of gathering a paycheck from the same place, but they're no more a team than an individual tennis player. For you as someone who's experienced both leadership in business, leadership in sports, what are the elements that take a collection and make them a team?
First of all, there's no team unless there's a common cause. There needs to be commitment to some common outcome of everybody's work and time together. Otherwise, why share your journeys? Second is a team means that people have primary roles and they're accountable to those primary roles, but they're not the only roles. We don't hire somebody into a box on an org chart. We hire somebody to fill a primary role, whether that be marketing or operations or finance or whatever else. But you have to be willing to step out of your role because it's what's necessary at a point in time for either success or in a moment of crisis or in a moment of support of other teammates. Okay? It just lines up very well. The last part is really one of goodwill. You can't tear down your teammates. If you're tearing down your teammates, it doesn't really work. So when you're willing not to work for your own aggrandizement, but really work for the success of the team, that's that common cause. And you're not tearing down other people. You're accountable to do your main role and you're stepping in to help in other areas where it's necessary. That's a team. And it doesn't matter if it's business or football or hockey or just pick a space, but that's a team.
I love it. Primary role, right guard, Albion College. But the opportunity might be that they might need you to move to left guard occasionally, and you can't complain about the challenge. You have to step right in if that's what's good for the organization.
Yeah, Don, and more often, actually, if I missed my guy, the fullback had to step up and block him to save the quarterback. And so that was somebody stepping out of their primary role to pick up my primary miss. That was really important to come back to the huddle and know somebody had your back.
Yeah. When that happens in both sports and business, how important is it that you recognize that person that had your back and stepped in for you?
Great question, which is, how do we do this? And first of all, you have to own your mistake. You'd be amazed at the power of the vulnerability, just saying, you know what? Thank you. I missed him. I should have had him. It's totally my mistake. And I realized that you were blocking my guy and you could have been blocking a different person, but you just own it. And so few people, often this corporate organization hierarchy, they don't want to own the mistakes. And what they don't realize, everybody knows it was their mistake.
Right.
And you actually create more credibility by owning it and stepping into it and learning from it. And somebody will want to help you if you own it. If you try to do the old finger cross or push it to somebody else, which is so common these days, it actually destroys your credibility and nobody's really feeling you're part of them. You're really just working for yourself. So just owning the bad news, and especially own it proactively if you've created it. It's never worked against me. It's just never worked. And all of the mistakes I've made over 7 or 8 different companies I've been leading and all the rest, I get that I get to make the final decision in some cases. But when they're bad ones, I just own it. Sorry, I messed up and I realized that I created a lot of work for you and it just didn't work. But I know that, and I just want to appreciate you doing what you're doing. And it creates greater authenticity and commitment to one another than the other approach.
Scott, what a font of wisdom. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from you today, and I can't say thank you enough. I appreciate it, and I hope that as you take on new challenges, just know that the next guy in line in the ticket booth will be me. I'll be standing right behind you.
You're very kind, Don. I appreciate this opportunity. Certainly the chance to talk about and answer these questions is always aligning and helps create crystallization in my mind. We're all in this together. So if there's anything I can do for you, or we can connect or just kind of work things along, that's a big part of the big payback from doing what we all do. So happy to do that.
Thanks for being a corporate competitor. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you and this opportunity very much.
Scott is powered by his connection to people. He learned that members of a team are motivated if their leaders see them as equals. And when they see you that way, they will be more receptive to the difficult conversations. I encourage you to create a setting that helps your teammates to learn about each other so that they can learn from each other. Often at work, you'll have staff meetings or department meetings where you're busy discussing business, but there's not enough time for team members to get to know each other. Change that. If you love this discussion, I recommend listening to episode 20 with Fred Perpall, CEO of the Beck Group. He outlines the benefits of informal time together with instructions on how to create that time for your own team. Jump into episode 20 next. If you could share one habit One thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir. How
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. As we enter the new year, we are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access of Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but through the new year, you can enroll for $49. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to get started. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.